thank you for joining us and welcome to another Testimony Tuesday. Today we have Gigi Bisong, a spiritual teacher, author, speaker, and storyteller. Thank you so much for joining us on this Testimony Tuesday, Gigi.
Thank you for having me. I'm excited to be here with you and your community.
Yes, excited. I'm so excited. So, can you tell us? I know I kind of give like a brief overview, but can you please tell us a little bit about yourself, your background, anything you want to share about yourself?
Yeah, well, I grew up actually here in Minneapolis. So I've like lived here my whole life. My dad is from Nigeria. My mom is Black American from Little Rock, Arkansas. And my dad came here to get his master's degree in psychology. And so that's kind of how they met, like here in the Midwest. And so I actually have a piece of both my father and my mother. My mother was like a fashionista. We used to call her Miss Hollywood, back in the day. And my father was like the philosopher, the writer. And so I definitely feel like both of those, I'm like really merged into that. Yeah. And I grew up just like immersed into like reading and writing. And that's kind of where my love for writing and speaking was birthed out of.
That's so cool. So you're from Nigerian descent. So cool. So can you talk a little bit about your life's testimony in terms of healing and being liberated? If you could think of just to help, what are some events in your life that have helped you realize you need a change or healing?
Dang, yeah, that's a good question.
There's so it is a deep one.
No, that's such a good question. I mean, growing up, I was very shy. I was a really shy girl, and to be honest, I always kind of wonder, like, was I actually shy, or was I just traumatized from socialization? You know what I mean? And so, like, a part of me felt there wasn't as much like welcoming, for like unique ways of like presenting yourself, and I definitely didn't feel like I fit into any box. And so I felt, what it felt like to not be included into like typical American culture. But then I also was not included with, the Black culture either as a child. And so I really felt like, where do I find my way? And so that was a struggle for me. And that's one reason why writing became like a healing tool for myself. I was able to tap into my higher self, into like another realm with my writing and my creativity. And I remember wanting a therapist, but like back then, especially like in the Black community, it was like, no, we don't be doing that.
Yeah, we don't do therapy.
So I was like, who am I going to talk to? So I just became my therapist. So I had me and then my therapist, they would like communicate like in my mind together. And so that was like maybe the first signs of the healing. And then, it was just kind of, evolved like over time, of course, deeper and deeper.
It sounds like writing was like a container for you in terms of like unable to, connect socially. It takes a lot of energy, but like what am I trying to say? Like writing was like a container for your feelings as a way to communicate and heal. That's what it sounds like to me.
Yes. And like I always say, like the paper never rolled its eyes at my thoughts and my expressions, like the paper was all like, I'm here to receive, and so I was able to feel safe to express in that way.
It's non-judgmental, it's judgment-free.
Yes.
And it's like a space for you. So can you talk about your work a little bit more?
Yeah, so my work originally started with me public speaking, like sharing my stories, my wisdoms, my healing through the art of public speaking. And it's evolved into creating spaces for women to gather, just as you were doing right here, for women to share their stories and for women to honor each other. And I think it's really a lot about what I wanted as a child. I wanted that safety, that community that honored the unique beauty in you. And I wasn't expecting you to be like me or for you to talk like me or walk like me or behave like me. Like I was just, in love with who you are, so I wanted to create communities where women could learn to do that for themselves and for each other, and for there to be more safety and sisterhood. And so I create lots of different communities for that. Right now, I have communities for white women who are wanting to step deeper into their allyship and to hold space on a level really embodied in their allyship and not performing, and not going into that realm. And then also having communities of spaces for women of color to do their healing in a space that feels safe, with just each other.
That's amazing. You're creating spaces that you envisioned or needed as you growing up. That's so amazing. Going back to your story, what were your first initial steps towards your healing journey? I know you talked about writing and having a container within your writing, but in terms of like creating spaces for other Black women and for allies, I know at first you had to hold space for yourself and your healing.
Yeah.
Can you talk a little bit more about that?
Yeah, I mean, it's evolved in quite an interesting way. One of the first major moments I would say was doing a relationship, and I was just having lots of struggle, and I was just like, it just nothing was working. Like we just could not get eye to eye, and I started to realize, I don't want to sit and keep going into the same patterns. There's got to be a new way.
Mhm.
And so I actually read a book that gave me some insight on creating space in a life where I'm like in the present moment and I'm actually no longer living in story. And so I played around with that idea. We all hear about that idea of being in the present and being in oneness and not going back into our old stories. And so I did that for 30 days. And that was the first time I experienced like this true energy of like bliss and happiness that, I mean, it literally blew my mind. I don't have words to actually even share like what that experience felt like. Cause like happiness and blew my mind are just, it's kind of like, oh, okay. Like, no, this was like a major kind of thing.
Life
And for me,
changing.
the big, very life changing, it was like such an aha of like, whoa, like we have so much power in terms of how we can create a reality. And nothing changed. He didn't change. And so it was just a big, just realization that like, I don't have to just be a product of the world and being like slapped around and just like, oh, I'm going here, I'm going there. It's like, no, I can actually be very centered. So that was really meaningful. But I'm going to fast forward and jump to even like, 10 years and go more recently. Before I created the space for Black women, which was the Adore, Don't Ignore Black Women Summit, I watched the movie Black Klansman actually. And after watching the movie, it just like took me into this whole 3-month period where I felt like I was feeling the wounding of Black women in this lifetime and in lifetimes before me, like what it was like for them to be here in this world in a Black body. And so I was feeling pain that was my pain that I never witnessed, but I was also feeling pains that were not mine, that there was other women. So it almost felt like I was feeling the emotions and energies of like hundreds and hundreds of Black women in my one body. And so that was a lot emotionally. And I wanted to push it away because I'm like, I don't want to deal with this. Like, I just want to, be happy, have my normal life back. But I kept hearing this voice. And so I sat with them. And so I started to actually sing with them. I started to write with them. They taught me how to hold space for them. And that became like my deep kind of healing in terms of how to hold space for my own deep emotions that go back further than my own lifetime. And so that's kind of like the creation of how I can create that for other women.
And it's like, it looks like the work you're doing now, like that journey, that self-actualization, because it seems like you're still on that self-actualization journey in terms of like living in the present and being in the present. It translates into your work. Correct me if I'm wrong. But which brings us to our next question is, how did you arrive at the work you're doing and how healing intertwines with that?
Yeah, I mean, it's basically just like the story of like how the movie just kind of unfolded.
Mhm.
So it's a creation that didn't come from the mind. It wasn't like I was like, oh, what's a great business idea? Yeah, having a space called a door donut. It wasn't like something I thought of or like a business coach told me to do. It came through spirit. It came through being with what is. It came through learning how to tap into the body and the emotions and communicate with them. It came from tapping into the ancestors of trying to really understand and feel what messages they have that they want to be carried through you. And so that's where it came from. And so as uncomfortable as it was for me, I listened to the call and I said, all right, let's do it. And so that's where that, like this new creation all came from that space.
Mm-hmm. Wow, it's very deep work. It's very deep work.
Mm-hmm.
Um, um, I'm just reflecting on that. What are some upcoming things that we should look out for in terms of supporting you? How can folks support you? How can folks support your work, show up within your space?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Well, this Sunday, I'm having a storytelling space. So it's a part of the Embodied Ally program. So there will be white women, they'll be on the call that will be listening, holding space as in being listeners and receiving. And then women of color will be the storytellers and creating the stories for themselves. So if there's women listening in that want to have their stories told on Sunday, want to be one of the storytellers, we are still looking for maybe one more storyteller right now, so they can send me an email or connect with me. And my website is gigibisong.com.
But that really sounds like really nice space. So, Black women are sharing their personal stories. It can be any form of story, or is there any specifics in terms of the story?
It's totally wide open. And so I know some people are like, I don't know, like I've never really, done this before, so I can help guide them to
Mhm.
help find a story if they want to send me an email. But the title is called Through Her Eyes.
Mm.
And so it could be about your own personal healing, your own journey, could be about your culture, so a story from your parent, from your grandmother, from where you used to grow up in, anything that really just resonates with your heart and what your heart's wanting to as a gift to others.
Yes, and we'll definitely share that. It sounds like a really therapeutic session. Advice do you have for other Black women looking for their place in this world? And I know that's another hefty question.
Yeah. What advice do I have? Well, for starters, it's just like honoring all of our unique lived experiences. They
Mhm.
are all so different, yet there is this woven thread between us, and so I think it's important to hold that energy of, when we see our sister, to know that we have that woven thread between us, and also that there's a very unique experience that sister holds, like a unique story, right? And I think with that, there it's like a cutting the cord of any divisions amongst us, or cutting the cord of who the sister is supposed to be or who she has to be.
Mhm.
And so it's giving almost, I imagine, within each of us, as women, we have that younger girl inside of us.
Mhm.
And that younger girl in some shape or form was abandoned in this lifetime, whether that's, from society at large because she's a Black girl, like a young Black woman, and that could also be within her family, within her neighborhood, her community, you add on all the layers. So there's this like sense of abandonment that can be in that little girl. And so at least if our sisters, when we, show up for one another, if we can remember that we are woven, and also remember there's a unique beauty, a unique quality of light in the sister in front of you, and to hold her in that uniqueness. And so with that, this young little girl that's inside of her no longer has to feel abandoned, no longer has to feel dismissed or not good enough, and that's what the world is so quick to tell us in one way or another, in multiple ways. And so at least within the way that we connect with each other, if we can soothe that little girl in the way that we look at our sisters, the way that we honor her, the way that we say hello, and all those little details. And then one other thing I would say, just even individually, is to honor all the complexities of us. So there's definitely this like this beauty, this courage, this strength, this wisdom that we hold that is so deep,
Yeah.
And if we haven't tasted that, if we don't even understand what that means, which is beyond just the beauty of, the extra beauty of a Black, it goes way deeper than that. And if we haven't tasted that in terms of the energy then I would recommend Black women listening in to try to cultivate more of experiences where they can tap into that energy of the beauty, the real rooted beauty of us. And whether that is, connecting to your ancestors, or whether that's speaking to the elders, in your community and just listening to them, and or whether that's listening to music that might remind you of where your people have come from, and just kind of closing your eyes and feeling the power in that and allowing it to saturate through you. I think it's important for us to connect to the truth of who we are, being in a world that tries to tell us who we are, which is false, which is just false programming, and which keeps us, really thinking we're inferior, when in fact that's,
Limiting.
all this, it's so limiting, and it's not true, like beyond not true. And so to space to honor that. And then last thing is to also have the space to honor, like, maybe the heavy emotions. Like, there might be a lot of anger that one has of, like, the world that we currently live in, what we have to go through, things our children have to go through, add on all the other things on top of that. There might be resentment, there might be shame, of, like, our lived experience. So just having safe spaces to express that, because there's nothing wrong with being angry about it. There's nothing wrong with feeling shameful. There's nothing wrong with having resentment or whatever emotion. So that could just be in your room with, by yourself, and allowing yourself to express, the fullness of that anger, or the fullness of the sadness, or joining your sisters together and saying, we're doing this in ceremony. We're lighting a candle. We're going to express our anger through song, through music, through poetry, or however you want to do it. But it's important to actually move that emotion and not think it's bad, and just try to do in the world and just, like, make changes externally, but to actually allow space for that emotion to be felt fully.
And it's so hard to understand that and know that, because in a world filled with limitations and labels and being put in boxes, and you're told how to feel, what to feel, how you should be, how you should act. So it's very hard to go against that narrative, that conforming narrative, and be like, wow, okay, my feelings are valid. I should feel a certain way, and I should hold space for it, and I should express it. It's very hard for a lot of people to know that. And going back to what you were saying earlier, it's empowering when someone actually, like, hears you, especially as a fellow Black woman, like, they acknowledge you, they hear you, they hold space for your emotions. It's very empowering. I like that. But Gigi, anything else you want to add?
I will say, like, one quick thing though, because you made a good point about how hard it is, like, in this world to just, like, acknowledge the emotions that we do have, being told, like, those are bad, or, like, you got to feel this way and all that. Is one thing that I do is I imagine that part of me almost as if it's my younger me. It's like starting to cultivate, like, a relationship with, like, your inner child. I think might make it easier for some people to be able to be like, okay, I'm feeling sad right now, and then I imagine, like, my inner child. And so the more that you do this, I think the more natural it starts to become, where it doesn't become like this weird thing that you're trying to do. And so it's just like, even maybe closing your own eyes and imagining yourself as 8 years old, or whatever age that feels really important to you, and see her, like, see her face and get to know her. And so those moments when you are feeling maybe a heavier emotion, you can realize, like, oh, that's my inner child speaking. And just remember that many times when she was younger, for most of us, maybe not for all of us, but when we were younger and we were feeling heavy emotions, if that's like anger or tears, we might have been told that there's nothing to cry about, or get up, or, like, be quiet, you know what I mean, like, stop making so much noise. So we're just getting shunned down, watered down, dismiss, emotions abandoned. And so we don't want to do that to her. Like, we don't want to do to her what everybody else did, or what many people did to her when we were little. And so we want to have her not feel abandoned. So when she's hurting, even if you're in the middle of a meeting, maybe you can't just, like, wail out and just, like, go crazy. But, like, you can let her know, I want to know what you're feeling. Like,
Right.
I fully want to hear you. I can talk to you tonight, like after work, we can talk. I mean, that might sound weird to some people to be like, what? But that at
That's
least gives her
interesting.
safety. It
Yeah.
gives her safety to know, okay, I'm going to be listened to when it's safe to
Mhm.
open up. And then you actually do that. And she starts to feel safe with you. If you imagine like a little kid, if they, let's say that they didn't get any food, they haven't gotten water, they're not nourished, they're hungry, and
Mhm.
no one's feeding them. What are they going to do? Are they going to sit in a corner and be nice and behave? No, they're going to start acting out. Like, would you do that to a child and tell them to shut up because they're thirsty, they're hungry? Like, that inner child in us is hungry. They need nourishment, and maybe we're not nourishing them. And so when you start to communicate with her, she'll share with you how she needs nourishment. And
Yeah,
yeah.
that is such a refreshing perspective, talking to yourself like, you're 8 years old and be like acknowledging that. Because at times, especially like speaking for me, because I'm one of those people who like their emotions as a child was not, validated. We tend
Yeah.
to seek validations from others, whether it be therapists, whether it be friends, we ask them to validate our feelings. But it's so interesting. I'm going to actually start doing that when I have emotional moments where I'm just like, okay, acknowledge it within myself. It's so refreshing because you have power over your emotions in a sense as well. You're giving power back to yourself and recentering yourself and being that person that validates it. I love
Totally.
that perspective.
Yeah.
Yeah. Thank you so much, Gigi. I appreciate you. I appreciate your time.